Hi everyone, Dom Famularo back again, the Artist Series at a Distance. What I love at a distance, that even what this pandemic has given us, it's made us continue to put these transformative ideas coming from these great artists to be shared with each and every person as you listen to this. This is so exciting. And today, I have got this incredible personality that wears so many different hats. Chris, I want to talk about all these different hats. I want you all to welcome Chris Vrenna with me today. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Chris, I mean, we've got like musician, Grammy award-winning producer, engineer, remixer, songwriter, programmer, founder of the electronic band Tweaker, which I love, and as an educator now. So you've got a lot of different things that you've built in your career, and you wear these many different hats, but you're really great at all of them.
Thank you. I learned early on that the jack of all trades sort of idea, I just had a lot of interests in things, in different things. So that always made me keep learning and trying something different or learning about something I hadn't actually done before. In our modern age, I think it's more important than ever for people to be well-rounded in a lot of different skill sets. I just think that's kind of where we're at right now.
That's a great point, because the well-roundedness is going to give more avenues of income. And like you said, if you have all these different likes, whether it's just playing drums and performing in a band, or whether it's producing or engineering or songwriting and, programming, these are all things that you kind of grabbed onto it. So where did music in the early days of you learn? Where did music enter your life?
I started playing drums when I was 6. Prior to that, my dad always said that if there was something on television or we were at a parade or something, that he would notice that I would move and bob or stomp my feet in time to whatever music I was listening to. Kind of notice that I had this innate timing thing. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania, which is right up on the Great Lake there, about 2 hours north of Pittsburgh. And he went around to the different music stores and tried to get me lessons, and everybody said, 6 is a little too young, bring him back when he's 8 or maybe 10. And he found a jazz drummer who said, sure, it's a little young, but let's try him out. And then he told my dad, if he's not picking it up, then we'll just reassess it. And my dad was like, fair enough. That's all we can ask. So I started playing drums at 6, and the first thing we had to do was learn how to read. I'd never even touched a real drum for 6 months or 8 months. It was nothing but practice pad and learning proper stick control. And we had that book called Stick Control for the Snare Drummer, and we had to learn our 26 standard rudiments. His name was Joe Matzak. His approach was, you're not just here to sit down and start making noise. If you're here to learn, you're going to learn properly. So I had to learn how to read drum charts from a very young age. So that all started, and then I did marching band, and then I graduated high school in 1985. So right smack in the middle of the 80s. So I was there for the birth of new wave and synthesizers and MIDI, MIDI 82, I believe it was, at the NAMM show, 82, Dave Smith. That was right at my peak, like I was a freshman in high school. So all of a sudden I'm like, well, what are these? These sounds don't sound like drums anymore. What is going on here? And then that led me down the path of electronics pretty much right away.
So this is interesting. You marched in the Erie Thunderbirds Drum and Bugle Corps. That had to kind of help your chops and thought, what you were learning with the lessons, you're reading, you're learning your rudiments, you're getting good foundation. Now you're applying it with this drum corps. You're starting to get your chops together. I
had pretty good chops when I was young, yeah. I did 2 seasons of musical dinner theater, and I was their pit drummer for 2 seasons. So, I've played Jesus Christ Superstar and Pippin and Godspell and Grease and all those shows. I was much, much, much younger than the rest of the ensemble that did this particular, musical dinner theater, the league and that Erie had. And I was in the youth symphony. Erie had a youth symphony that I auditioned for and was in. My first European tour was actually with that youth symphony. We did this kind of an exchange thing where we lived with families, and we went to Germany and Karlsruhe, Germany, Innsbruck, Austria. South of France, Monaco, Italian Riviera. Did this. We were over there 2 or 3 weeks. I was 15, I think. So that was my very first time. And we played all American composers like Copeland and things like that. So Rite of Spring and all that sort of stuff. So we would, So it was that was my. So for me, I never was like, well, rock and roll is all I want to do, or this is all I want to do, and I beat that into my students as well. Now that I teach, it's like playing percussion in a class in an orchestra, or playing Broadway show musicals, or being in your marching band at high school, or drum corps if you're lucky enough that your city has a drum corps, and your punk rock band. They're all the same. They're all using your musical knowledge and your drumming skill. And I think it makes you better at one genre by learning other genres. So marching band made me a much better rock drummer because the timing and the synchronization we had to have and to do that. And, you got to judge, walking backward, judging you the whole time. So it also gets you into performing and, being in front of people. So I've been performing since a very young age. So I have no qualms about that. But, that is something I know people struggle with. You can't just say, I just want to do this and that's it. I don't think you can be as closed-minded about it. You have to kind of give everything a shot.
Well, I think this is a good point. And my point is you are open-minded enough to take in, listen, from drum and bugle corps to the rites of spring to 9 Inch Nails. That's a pretty wide scope there, Chris.
Yeah, it's pretty wide.
Musical stretching knowledge. This is really incredible. So you made the move to Chicago, right?
Well, let's see here. I am talking to you from Huntsville, Alabama. This is my 8th state I've now lived in. So my first stop after graduating high school in Erie, I went to college for a while. I went to Kent State. For anybody musical historians out there, there's a song called "For Dead in Ohio." That's about Kent State and the riots in the Vietnam War. That's where I went to college. So I went there. I had met Trent. Trent's not quite 2 years older than I am. So I met him when I was still in high school, and he was out of high school because we're from neighboring towns. So he's from a town just south of Erie. So he was living in Cleveland, and Kent State's only about 45 minutes south of Cleveland, Ohio.
Right.
So I would drive up to Cleveland, and then Trent and I played in a new wave band together. That new wave band eventually broke up in 87, 88, and 87, I guess. And then he started writing his own songs, and those songs were to become 9 Inch Nails.
Right.
So I moved up to Cleveland, and I lived there for many years. And then I moved to Dallas, Texas for about a year and a half. Then I went back to Kent State for one more semester. Then I went to Chicago, and I was there for a couple of years or so. And then that's when Trent and I went out to LA, and we did the Downward Spiral album out in LA.
Right.
92, 93, early 94. And then New Orleans, and then back to LA, and then Madison, Wisconsin, and now Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh, well, listen, even moving to all these different states, there have been many different musical influences that you've pulled out from each state.
The genre of music that 9 Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, that we all get lumped into is called industrial music. And if I was going to explain what that genre it was to somebody who maybe didn't know the term, I would explain it like this. In the 80s, two things were happening. You had heavy metal, but you also had this new wave thing that was happening with the synthesizers and all those new wave bands. Like, Flock of Seagulls and Depeche Mode and all these things, Wang Chung, Tears for Fears, all these bands. Those bands, I love those bands, but there was an aggression that existed in heavy metal that did not exist in new wave.
Right.
Those songs were more pop and more, So the idea was, well, what if we took that angry aggression, heaviness, distortion, angst from metal, but instead of playing your traditional guitar-based live drums, we applied that to electronic drum machines and synthesizers. Right. And lo and behold, you get this new genre called industrial, which is kind of like heavy metal, but played on synthesizers with distortion. Just like you had Seattle as the center point for grunge in the 90s, Chicago was the center point for this new burgeoning industrial genre back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I had to go to Chicago because that's where all the bands that I was listening to that inspired me and Trent and others like us were all from and were all living. So I went there to partake into that scene for quite a while.
So you're starting to meet a wide variety of different musicians too, and as you're playing with them, you're starting to create differently from their influence. So what was it like when you hit that Chicago industrial rock? How was that influencing you?
But my thing was always, I'm a drummer, and I see all your drums behind you, but I was always intrigued with when electronic drums were first invented. There was a company called Simmons, and they were a British company, and they looked like stop signs, and they were made out of Formica tops, and they ruined your wrists, and they were awful, but they were the coolest thing ever invented. Yeah. But when you hit them, you got all these. You could dial the sounds just like you would dial a synthesizer. They were basically little mini synthesizers with an oscillator and a filter and a white noise generator and an envelope to make and all these weird sounds. And then sampling came around, and then you could sample. Like for example, I had a drum machine that you could put sampled chips in it. My synth pop band at the time, nobody online laughed at me, was we had a song called Puppy Love. So I could buy a sample of a dog bark burnt onto an EEPROM chip inside, and I put that in my drum machine, and I'd hit the pad, and the pad would go arf arf arf, So it was Puppy Love arf arf arf, and I played this little like counter rhythm with the bark sound. It was as cheesy as you could get, but the idea that you could hit things and they could generate sounds that just weren't the drums just blew me away and became the whole reason for me to live. And I just wanted to see what I could do with that. And so getting to be around people who were, had access to that and had been doing it longer than I had, and seeing how they would make samples and how they could do things and make their own electronic samples. It was really fascinating. It's kind of where I got my electronic chops, if you will. Back in the 80s, when drum machines were first invented, like the 808, the Roland 808, Roland 909, the Roger Linn drum, right. The EMU SP12 and SP1200, which was a sampling drum machine. It was the first one you could sample directly into. There was this big uproar that happened that all drummers were like, oh, we're going to be put out of business, and now no one's ever going to need to call a session guy because they'll just program it on this little box and they won't need us. And I'm like, yeah, but what if you're the guy that knows how to program the box and then they still need you? That was always my answer. So I learned how to program all those boxes and became pretty good at it. So, you can either be replaced by technology or you can learn that technology and become good at it. And then now you're a double threat because, oh, you want me to play it? Okay, I'll just go. We can just track it live with mics. Oh, you don't have that capability or budget or whatever. You want to program it? I happen to be your man for that too. So it's win-win,
But it really is win-win because at that point it comes down to you have widened your value of who you are. And by having that open-mindedness and willing to accept technology, which many people are hiding away from technology, but the fact that you embraced it really kind of shows the fact that now you hit the 21st century, and that's when Tweaker came out, right? That's what you said.
My first record when I quit Nine Inch Nails in '90, it was like Christmas '97, beginning '98, and I moved out of New Orleans, went back to LA, and from there I lived in LA for 20 years after that. I just wanted to make my own music. Right. And there were some real cutting edge electronic artists out there at the time, instrumental artists, Aphex Twin being one of them, Autechre being one of them. There was a label called Warp Records that specialized in the music, and they were making sounds and like everything was asymmetrical and there was no vocals on it, so it didn't have to follow your A B C double B Beatles pop song structure that we all know and love. Right. So I was like, I just want to get better at keyboards and not just the drums, but everything. And so I wanted to make my own music. So one of the things I got into was Tweaker, which was it's not really a solo project. It's a collaborative effort with whoever I happen to be working with at the period of time of those records. So there's been 4 Tweaker records with 4 completely different sets of collaborators each time. And the music industry, we're a service industry. Yeah, at the heart of it. If we're a producer, engineer, remixer, all the stuff you mentioned at the beginning, we're working for somebody. If
Right.
I'm doing a MIDI production, like I just worked with, there's a producer out of Nashville. He's a heavy metal producer named Nick Raskulinecz. Brilliant guy. I love him to death. He's done all the Evanescence records, the last 2 Rush albums before sadly Neil died. Foo Fighters, Ghost, Hailstorm, like all these Grammy-winning metal bands.
Yeah.
He brings me in from time to time to add my wacky electronics to stuff. But I'm working for him, and I'm working for the band that, whether it's Amy Lee from Evanescence or the guys from Code Orange, there's always we're working for somebody.
Right.
It is still very creative, but if they're like, it's not actually what I had in mind. Could you do it? Could you do something more arpeggiated or not so low synth, but a higher stringy Gary Newman Cars era sounding synth? You're always kind of working for and with other people. So Tweaker was that one thing where I'm like, I only answer to one person, and that's me. Right. And if I don't like it, I ain't doing it. If I like it, I don't care if the rest of the world hates it. So I think any creative person who's watching this, whether you paint or write or sculpt or play a music, we all have to have that one outlet that has no strings attached to it. That's what Tweaker became, was that thing of, if it turns out and it's awful and it sucks, I'm not doing it to make money. It's a pure expression of just mental, emotional, and creative energy of where I happen to be. And, I think everybody can understand that.
Absolutely. And what great creative freedom that you gave to yourself at that point to just let stuff just flow out of what you were doing. So that's
it helps you when you do get paid gigs. You may not have the time, or you may not feel comfortable enough to go, I'm going to try something totally wacky and different, while you're wasting the client's time and money on a project, So you may learn some new skills or try some new techniques. And then the next gig you get, you go, and I did this thing when I was just messing around on Tweaker when I had nothing but time to burn for free. I'm going to do this technique for this, and then, if it works, it works, it doesn't. But at least you're not wasting everyone's time trying to come up with something new, So it benefits you to have that time for yourself, I think.
It sure does. But what's interesting is that in the creation of all of this here, let's just talk about the business side. You've got to now maintain a business side where you're keeping track of you, whether it's working for Nine Inch Nails or whether it's doing some of your own work and your creativity. How did you balance all of this?
I always use the metaphor of like spinning plates, like in a circus. If I only had one or 2 plates, it was almost too easy and it was boring. The challenge is to have enough plates going that it kept me fresh all the time. Jumping from this plate to this plate to this plate, 3 or 4 was about a good number for me when I was younger. Not so much anymore. My brain can't keep getting old. My brain just can't keep up that many plates anymore. But I'd have a remix. I'd be working on something over here while I was doing this, or like when I was on tour, I'd always keep a laptop rig so that I could do stuff in a hotel room, like a video game score, which I did a lot of in the 2000s, things like that. So I could be writing and sending the game company ideas, scoring ideas, in my days off, when I'm parked in, St. Louis, Missouri or someplace for a day. But if I would get too many plates going and then you just, everything suffers. But for me, it was, and I also tell this to my students. I'm like, maybe your goal is to produce your own music and then go out on tour. Awesome.
Great.
But working, maybe doing engineering at a studio up in Nashville for, like as a quote day gig, it's not really a day gig because you're still in the industry. And you're watching other engineers, even though you may be the person just getting coffee and pizza, you're still in there and you're watching it and you're seeing it, and that you can take all that knowledge home. There's no such thing as like a bad gig. They all offer you something. Half of my lessons at college are just like sharing my experiences of what not to do. Yeah. Sometimes you're like, man, if I would have known now, if I knew then what I know now, stories. And even the bad experiences can teach you something for future work. And it all becomes just part of your own experience as you mature and get older.
So staying open to any opportunity that might be involved in the music industry could relate to something that you might discover you had a love for it, or you might have wanted to add another plate to spin.
Right.
Is really what it comes down to.
I want to buy a new hat. I got to wear, I got a cowboy hat and a baseball cap and I don't even know what kind of, you know what I'm saying, a bowler and
Absolutely. And I think what the younger generation has to know is wearing different hats means the different hat that you put on is a different focus of that area, whether it's being a musician or an engineer or a writer or a programmer. Spinning plates, where there was a plate with a pole, and you put the plate on top of the pole, you spun the plate, and you moved the pole so the plate was spinning. When you put the second plate up, you had to start the second plate and then go back to the first plate to make sure so when you say spinning plates, you had to kind of keep all these plates spinning, which is really what you do so well. And that takes a whole nother skill. That's a whole nother skill that you've developed naturally to be able to balance all of this.
Yeah. And people in the freelance world, I guess you could use juggling balls as another one. I always like the plate metaphor. It was just a better image for me than juggling. But it would work, like you always see people juggling 3 balls, but then they add that 4th and 5th and then a chainsaw and then a bowling pin and, when you see them on, in Vegas or something. But as a freelancer, and a lot of us are freelancers, and we go from tour to, if you're a touring musician, you may go from tour to tour to tour. I have friends who do that. That's their job is, they'll, whether they're a stage tech or a front of house mixer, or you're an independent, studio musician or an independent producer / engineer, we work project to project, gig to gig. And so, one thing you learn early on in freelancing is never say no. Because if somebody, if you've got a couple plates going already and you get this call and it's, they want you to do a remix for some huge band on Warner Brothers Records, you don't want to say no to that. There was always this unspoken thing. If you say, you get one no. Was kind of the rule. You can say, I'm too busy one time.
Right.
A lot of times that person will still never call you again because you said no the first time. But the most you get is one no. And then if you say no twice, you will never hear from that person or anybody that person knows. Because that person may know somebody and that other somebody may say, I was thinking about calling that Vrenna guy. And he's like, I tried him twice for remixing, and every time I contact his manager or him, he's always too busy. And the other person goes, oh, well, that's too bad. Well, I'll just try someone else then. And then you've lost a gig. You got to stay on these people's radars. And so sometimes you say yes, even though you maybe knew in your brain, I don't know how I'm going to keep this one going. But if I say no to that producer right now, that producer will he'll find someone else. And then they'll call that person again and again and again. So
absolutely, and it's a very dangerous place to go. But this is great advice. So talk about now. You mentioned about the video games and the music for that. I mean, you did Call of Duty, Advanced Warfare, Doom 3. Just talk about how that came about and how you developed that.
I love scoring games. It's one of my favorite things to do as an artist because the way you have to score video games is totally different than scoring any other visual format. Because every other visual format, whether it's TV or film, I guess is what I'm talking about, the video's been cut and you write to the video, and scene starts, culminates with a gunshot on this frame, and then then there's a thing and a person dies, and then you drop, and then there's a dialogue. Then dialogue kicks back in or whatever, but it is done. But video games are unique to each player's experience. So you may be really good at a game. I may be horrible at playing video games. So you enter this room, arena, whatever, and your job is to kill the zombies. You may be able to get through that room in, 3 minutes or something like that, and you're really good. I'm horrible. I may die a few times. It may take me 15 minutes to kill all the zombies eventually. So you have to have music that can loop and play during that battle part that can loop forever and not sound just like a loop going around and around and around and around, because that'll make people go crazy. Yeah. We got into it because Trent and I were both big gamers back in the day, and we were really into the first-person shooters when those got invented. in the early 90s by a company called id Software. And they invented Wolfenstein was the very first one, then was Doom 1 and Doom 2. And then they made a game called Quake. So trying to talk about it in the like on our first tour buses, we would bring two old school, at the time they were state of the art, 486 chip PCs. We put one in the front lounge, one in the back lounge, and connect them via a coax LAN and make a LAN network so that we could play death matches against each other. So trying to talk about this, and that company id saw all that in the press and went, wow. So they asked Nine Inch Nails to score this Quake game in 1995 or 96. It was one of those two. And because they knew we were such huge fans of their work and stuff like that. So that's how I ended up meeting those guys. And then that led to me doing Quake 4 and Doom 3 and American McGee's Alice. And then eventually that branched off into like the Call of Duty thing. And I just did Quake Champ. They did a huge reboot of Quake about 3 years ago now. And I did that for them again. So that's another lesson is if you get a gig working with, or, you know, with a producer or a label or an engineer or a game company, a lot of our work is repeat business, because if you do a good job and you're cool and that producer, label, engineer, band director, video game company, you do good work and you're good to get along with, they'll say, well, we could try somebody new, but we know Vrenna does good work and he's a great guy and we just like him and we trust him. So building this weird trust between producer, label, band director, video, once you have established that, they'll just keep calling you again and again and again and again, because they don't have time and money to waste trying out people that may drop the ball, may miss deadlines, may fail, may not write the kind of music they're looking for.
Right.
So that's another huge lesson in keeping a career going.
Well, that's a great business advice, because I mean, it really is a matter of, listen, you got to love what you're doing. If you're passionate about it, you're into it, you're into the video games, and you understand the concept and the process of how it has to be formulated.
You know, like I had trouble getting into films because, like, for example, it was a horror movie. It was going to be a direct-to-cable type of thing, but the director loved my first Tweaker record and used a lot of my tracks as temp score as he was editing the film together. So his idea was, well, let me just get the guy who made this record score this movie. I'm not going to say the name of the movie because it is, you can find it online. And it's not very good at all, like at all. And I got so excited. I'm like, this will be a great first step into film scoring. And then it went to the production. It was like Paramount or somebody who was producing it. And the producers went, okay, yeah, cool. Like, yeah, I get where you're going at with the director. And they're like, wait a minute. He's never scored a full feature film before. And the guy's like, well, that's his only downfall. And they're like, we will not sign off. We don't want to be his first trial at scoring an entire feature. Because what if he sucks? What if he can't do it? What if he cracks? What if he misses deadlines? And they ended up going with somebody who had film experience, you know? So like, and I was like, somebody has to give you your first shot, but nobody wants to be the one. They don't want to be the experiment, you know, to see whether or not you can score a Netflix series, which is my next goal. Is I really want to score a television series, like a horror sci-fi. There's so much streaming going on out there between Netflix and Hulu and Paramount Plus and Peacock and Apple and HBO Max. I mean, there's 6 I just rattled off right there.
Yeah.
That, you know, somebody's got to give me a sci-fi horror series. That's the one thing I haven't done that I really want to do is episodic TV.
Once you put that out to the universe, it's going to
put it out there.
It's going to listen very clearly, and you'd be surprised what'll happen. But as a producer, a remixer, and an engineer, when I look at some of the bands, the Smashing Pumpkins, U2, Nine Inch Nails, Skinny Puppy, Megadeth, Rammstein, Metallica, Marilyn Manson, Rob Zombie, Green Day. I mean, you've had some experiences with being involved with these to really pull a lot of knowledge and experience out of these bands.
You know, each one of them teaches you something different. Like I said, it's either a new skill or how to behave, how to approach different personality types, how to interact better, you know, with other people. Sometimes just sitting back and not saying a word and just watching. Yeah. You know, you don't always have to be the center, you know, just keep your mouth shut and just see what that person's doing. Hearing their stories, it can be beneficial. Like, wow, I'm going to remember that. Again, it's one of those things where if you work hard and try to always do your best at stuff, keep a good reputation going. Yeah. That it goes a long way in our industry. It's because people think it's a huge industry, but it's really pretty small. It's endless, and you never stop learning. That's the thing. You never stop learning.
That's a key aspect I want to bring up. The fact that you continue to be this constant learner, that's really a plus that you have. Who do you think, did you have a mentor that saw you and that guided you along the way, that you leaned towards their wisdom?
There wasn't like one person. Like each project, I would end up bonding with one of the people. Okay. It's weird. There's always that one person, that one band member, that one other person in the city that you really click with. And then so that would become the person for that project, that we would lean on each other. There's a producer, his name's Flood, simply Flood. And he's my all-time favorite producer. He worked with us on Downward Spiral. All my favorite records by like some of the biggest bands on the planet were produced by him. I've worked with producers who have their sound. So every time I see a particular name, there's one I'm thinking of in particular, you see that name, all the records are going to start, they all kind of have a similar sound. Like this one producer, same one I'm talking about, had their own studio. The mics were always set up, already pre-patched into the console. Already had the EQs and the compressors set, and it was like an assembly line, more or less. Yeah. And yes, he had a lot of hit records, but there was no uniqueness to each one. And eventually, when that particular sound became not in vogue anymore in rock, all of a sudden that guy's like not, But the thing about Flood was he's produced my favorite Depeche Mode record, my favorite Smashing Pumpkins record, my favorite Nine Inch Nails record, my favorite PJ Harvey record, my favorite Pop Will Eat Itself record, my favorite Ninja record, and none of them sound like each other. He had this way of bringing the best out of whatever that artist was and making that artist the best of what that artist was. And so I've modeled my entire production career after Flood, because it was like that. When I work with people, I don't want to make you sound like me. I don't want to interject myself into you. I want you to become the best you can be and do the best work you've ever done as yourself, And so I think more than anything, like I always go back to picturing him and how how he works.
Boy, that is great advice. What's interesting about it is the fact that you have kept yourself, as I said, that constant learner, that when you're working with somebody, you're not afraid to take in, their experience and their knowledge and learn from them at that moment and continue to grow.
It just becomes one more page in the book, or one more color to the paint palette, Right. And I'm a big metaphor guy. Oh man, yeah, it just adds more colors to your palette of what you can do, or how to approach things.
Let's talk about, with all of this here, listen, Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails, all these different projects, Tweaker that you've done, these different things that you've produced and engineered. Let's talk about education, where now you're at Calhoun Community College in Alabama, in Huntsville, Alabama. I mean, what's happening with that now? How'd you get involved with the educational part? So
a lot of things came together in 2013 for me. I've known Manson since before, and because Trent signed him to the label, and I've known the guy for 30 years. And but in 2004, by a fluke, I ended up in his live band, which I'd worked with him in the studio on his early records, but like I never as part of the band. And his drummer got hurt and couldn't tour, and so I got a call like, "Hey, would you come, be the drummer for this one tour?" 7 years later, I'm still in the band. I was in it full time, producing and engineering it and doing the drum programming when we're in the studio. And then going out on the road, I started off as the drummer. Then the next tour, the drummer, of course, had healed by that time. He came back, and then I moved over and I was the live keyboard player for the remaining tours of my time with him. But I was going through addiction issues, pretty heavy. And so I ended up having to quit that band after 7 years, it was enough. I also suffered a torn rotator cuff that particular year. 40 years of drumming. It was all repetitive motion, bone spurs, and I was actually in the gym exercising, and I felt something just immediately get painful, and I went, ow, and my trainer was like, well, let's just lay off weights. We'll do cardio for the rest of the day. I'm sure you just pulled a muscle in your shoulder. Never went away, got worse and worse. It was so bad. I was doing a small tour in Canada. I got about 6 gigs into the tour, and I'm in tears. I couldn't, it was so painful, and I had to quit the tour, come back, had an MRI, and the guy was like, the doctor was like, holy smokes, I can't believe you waited this long to come, man. You have a very severe rotator cuff tear. So immediately I went in for surgery and had it repaired. It's 4 years later, tore out again, and I had to have it redone. Couple that with, I had started volunteering for some after-school programs around LA, and then that led to me getting invited to a couple small arts colleges. They would fly me in, and I would do like a master class for a day or two. And I just kind of had this thing. I don't know how, it just kind of happened organically. One school would find out that I went and did this, and they'd be like, oh man, we should get him to come to our school and talk about production or do something. And so I really loved doing it, and I really thought it was important. I don't know, it just was great. So there was a school in Wisconsin that they had me out as a guest, and they had called me about 5 days before I went in for the first surgery to invite me for summer to come up for summer and do my little dog and pony show again for the summer semester. And I told them, unfortunately, I wasn't going to be able to travel for like 6 months because of the surgery. And they called me back a couple of days later and said, look, we want to offer you a full-time teaching job. If you're not going to be able to tour and you can't really play drums for quite a while, we don't know what you're going to do. But if you'd like to try teaching out, we'd love to, come up here for a year. Talked it over with my partner, Melissa, and was like, let's try it and see what happens, And once again, a different hat, a different thing. I'm still in a recording studio, only now instead of me just moving all the knobs and faders, I'm teaching young people what each knob and fader and button does on an SSL console, things of that nature, and how we record and setting up mics on drum sets and what the software Pro Tools is and things of that nature. And I immediately loved it. Teaching is very much like performing. You instead of learning a set list, you learn your lecture / lesson plan that you prepare. Your audience isn't a crowd in a theater. It's a crowd. It's a students in a classroom. So it's walking on stage is like walking up in front of a class and to a podium or wherever you're going to teach. It's very similar. And then you're done teaching. It's like walking off stage. And so it wasn't that difficult for me to like adapt into explaining it, and all that knowledge of working with producers and engineers just came pouring out of me. And like I said, I was still trying to get sober at this time, and it was almost my way of paying it forward to the next generation. Because my Nine Inch Nails, when we first blew up, I was 20, just turned 22, maybe. Maybe I was still 21. I think I was 22. I mean, I was pretty young to get Head Like a Hole and Down in It. And then next thing you know, we're on tour opening for Peter Murphy from Bauhaus and Jesus and Mary Chain and all these bands. That it felt important to me to share. Since people shared it with me, I need to now share it with other people.
Beautiful.
So I was in Wisconsin for 5 years, and then sadly the person who owned this private school retired and sold it, and so it all got closed down, which led me to taking a position at a very similar curriculum here in Huntsville at Calhoun. But during that time, to go all the way back to our Kent State, Cleveland, Ohio days, I never finished my college degree. I still had 18 credit hours left when Nails blew up. So, and I'm like, my parents were always like, you better, get that degree. And I'm like, yeah. And then, a Grammy later, a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame later, Woodstock concert later, they stopped nagging me about the fact I never finished college. Well, if you want to be a teacher, guess what you have to have? You have to have a college degree in order to be a teacher. So I found myself calling Kent State after 30 4 years and saying, hi, I went there from 86 through 89, and they found my catalog, they found my old transcripts, and I had to go back and finish those 18 hours and get my BS degree. So I did that, and then I wanted to expand my teaching, and if you want to do that, you need advanced degrees. So during COVID, I found a school, Southern Utah had a great online Masters of Music and Music Technology degree. Mm-hmm. So I went online during COVID and got my master's degree. So now I have a master's degree. So I can teach the next level up of courses. This fall, I will probably start a very specialized MBA degree because I would like to know more about the business side of stuff within the industry. And I would like to add more business courses to my own program because I wrote Calhoun's new program from the ground up. For their Associates of Applied Science degree, but I'd like to actually expand upon it and add a couple more business courses. And so, getting in it would be a specialized MBA in the music industry. So it's an MBA that focuses on how we get royalties, what is a work for hire, how payments are made, how you do accounting. I do love it. I love teaching, I just love sharing what I do with other people. When I am working all these freelance projects, I use those as real time, real world lessons for my students. And I bring in, I respect the privacy of the client, but I bring in what I can get away with showing and kind of show them what I'm doing so that they so they can see in real time that what I'm trying to teach them is still what the music industry does. And I am still doing it. As soon as classes are over, I got to drive to my studio and I got to get back to work at my moonlighting freelance career. And they really like that. They love seeing that happen in real time,
Well, welcome to the music industry. This is really what it's all about. And the fact that you are talking about the business side of it, that's really what the Artist Series is here about the Sessions panel. Focus on the business side so we can offer information for this next generation to seek success in the music industry. This is really what this is about. So the fact that you're going there to go for your business degree is really a great testimony to your continuation of being a student.
It seems important to me now because as I watch the industry change, Trent had his own imprint, but it was Interscope Records, and our A&R person was the Jimmy Iovine, like the president of the label. Trent went right to the top. Like that was our guy. And even when I was my whole solo career, I had a manager. I had my own music industry attorney that would do all of my contracts for production work and remix work or scoring work, what have you. I had an agent at CAA for a while that would help me get scoring gigs. Or when I took Tweaker on tour, I had to get a booking agent for that. So I had a booking agent. So, but that model, that old school model is happening less and less and less. Right. Sure, if you're Lady Gaga and, all the people you saw in the Grammys, absolutely. Of course you still have all those people working for you. You have a whole team and everybody's taking their cut percentage wise off the top. But for like the average, middle class musician that wants to make a living at it, most of us are doing our production work alone or with another person. I get brought in now more to mix albums than I do to record them. So most people are handling the recordings on their own, but they want it polished well. So I get hired to mix. They will get it mastered. They'll put it on Bandcamp. Maybe they'll press a couple hundred CDs when they go out on tour. They can sell them at the merch booth. Right. Things like that. They handle the business side themselves. The social media angle had changed a lot of the marketing that happened with the major label paradigm from decades ago. So I think the more business entrepreneurial side of things that young people can know, it just makes them better that they can handle the business side because they'll probably have to. Like I handle all my own deals now. It's the most uncomfortable thing I do. I will admit that. I'm not very good at, well, how much do you want to pay me? Well, how much do you want to ask for? Someone needs to throw a number out, and
Right.
That's why we paid managers, so they could fight with the labels like, I want this. And they're like, we only have this. And it's like, well, then Chris isn't doing the gig, but we want this. Well, why don't you come up and you come down? And that's what we paid them for. And I'm not very good at confrontation. So, but it's something that it's just the way the world now is for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And that's what the entrepreneurial understanding will allow you to have, the comfortability in negotiation and the understanding of your value and how to sell it, which is a phenomenal step that you're going towards. Let me ask you this. In closing, we have this entire audience out there that listens to, admires what you've done with the different bands you've been in, all the different things that you've programmed and written. What advice would you give to this next generation, just so they can have the ability of being able to really embrace their passion and find even some of the success that you have had and continue to have? What would you tell them?
I would tell them exactly this. When I first started teaching, I would say a large percentage of the students I was seeing, even in the technology part of it, not the performance side, came from a somewhat musical background. They had piano lessons or guitar lessons, or they played saxophone through middle school and high school band. 9 years later, that percentage is tiny. Yeah. And I don't want to tell everybody to go out there and learn a musical instrument, but we're talking about the music industry. And to not understand what the staff means, or what the names of the white and black keys are on a keyboard, how they work, why it's important that if you and people, I get this all the time, well, I just do it by ear and it all seems to work out. Good for you. But if you happen to write 4 different layers all on white keys, you're probably in A minor because you're probably a moody person wearing black, but maybe you're C major, or maybe somehow you accidentally kind of went to the relative and didn't realize that you changed the focus. And then on your 5th MIDI track, you started playing black keys and went, oh, what the heck is going on? And when I'm engineering, I may not know how to play guitar, but I can certainly, if I'm tracking a band and the guitar player's on the 5th fret, but the bass player's on the 6th fret, I can immediately go, stop. I don't know what the right thing is, but I know, and they look at each other and I go, put your fingers on wherever you just were, and they will, and I'll look at it and go, okay, you're on the 5th fret, you're on the 6th fret, that's a half step. I know that can't be right. It doesn't sound right, and there's no way you guys playing half step off. Yeah. And you're not some crazy prog band, but and even then, I don't know if it would sound that good, depending, unless it's a ninth. But anyway, I digress. Actually, it wouldn't even be a ninth because it's a half step, not even a whole step. So, and I'm like, and then the guitar player's like, no, it's here. And the bass player's like, I thought we were doing that. And I'm like, you figure it out, and then we'll punch back in. I get asked all the time with my wacky programming. Here's another example. I'm working for an artist. Let's say Evanescence, who I worked with last year on a track with Amy. She is so talented, by the way. When I get her stems and to do my wacky electronic stuff on, I marvel at her piano playing and the complexity of her songwriting. If you can't listen to her piano, my job is to add the wacky sounds underneath it. Those wacky sounds still need to be in whatever key she's written in. Right. So if I can't solo her piano stem and put up a synth patch or a string or a piano and figure out what key she's writing in, I can't call Amy Lee and say, hi, can you tell me all the notes that I'm allowed to play and all the notes I'm not allowed to play? You'll look like a freaking idiot, So you need to have a bit of ear training so that you can communicate. It's like going to Mexico. You may not be fluent in Spanish, but you can ask for help, Donde está el baño? Una cerveza, por favor. All those little jokey phrases that you can at least converse in that language. And music is a freaking language. And whether I'm I don't play an instrument, I don't need to know it. Yes, you do. I'm seeing too many people now that just come in. They had a cracked version of a DAW on a PC laptop, and everybody now just thinks I can be a producer. because I have FL Studio on a Dell. And I know, and it's like, but there's so much more to it than just getting your hands on the software.
Absolutely.
The tools we use are now universally available to everybody. You don't need $1 million to buy a giant recording console and a 24-track tape machine and all the outboard gear like you would have had to do in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and early 90s. We all know that, but you still need to know how to interact with that stuff and understand music and try to learn things the right way, that's a lot, but that's what I would tell people.
It's a lot, but it is great advice. And you know what I'm so impressed with? Listen, whether you're ordering one beer in Mexico, whether you're wearing different hats, whether you're spinning plates, whether you're juggling or adding a little color to the palette, you really have got a lot of stuff going on that you're able to.
I am the king of metaphor.
Well, I must thank you so much, Chris. You have done fantastic today. This has so much great meat to it that people can grab on to learn and propel themselves to this next level. So on behalf of the Artist Series at a Distance, I thank you so much, Chris Vrenna, for joining me and being a part of this incredible series.
I really appreciate you having me, and I hope the people who watch this get something out of it. I really do.
I'm sure they will, man. Thank you so much. Fantastic.
Yeah, you are very welcome.
Dom Famularo here, the Sessions panel. This is so exciting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Click the subscribe button to be a part of what we're doing. The views help us tremendously. All of your comments, we read them and react to them. This is incredible. The support you're giving us is great. The Sessions panel, we'll see you real soon.